It was magic. It wasn't just seeing Peter that made those KISS conventions magic. As we learned from the other ones, the experience of doing them really opened up our eyes to the living, breathing thing that we had created, above and beyond the records and songs. There it was, the KISS Army, the KISS Nation, alive and well. Clearly what was running through their veins was belief in this bizarre thing that we had created. Children were named after our songs. We would meet them. Hi, I'm Christine. I can't wait to turn 16 so I can become Christine 16. And they'd giggle. Meet my daughter, Beth. On and on and on. What's your name? I'm Dr. Love. Oh, really? And what's your name? I'm Mr. Speed. Sometimes there would even be weddings at the conventions, and the bride and groom would wear full KISS makeup. One of the most gratifying parts of the shows was the fan testimonials. People would tell us that they had been outcasts, nobodies, until they heard KISS, and from then on they had a refuge. It almost sounded religious. Girls wanted to come up and kiss us, and that was funny, and everybody got a kick out of it, but sometimes we would all, Paul, me, Eric, and Bruce, get lumps in our throats. At one of the conventions, an attractive young woman got up and told us about her boyfriend. They had met, fallen in love, and gotten engaged. Then out of the blue he had gotten cancer, and when it became clear he was going to die, he called off the wedding, because he didn't want to affect her life in this way, even though she was still willing to go through with it. Before he died, he asked her one thing: "Would you please bury my KISS records with me?" She explained to the rest of the people at the convention that the idea that someone could love a band so much had seemed strange to her. "Now I understand," she said. Then she collapsed, just burst into tears, and the whole place went silent out of respect and admiration for this woman. So often we'd get off that stage exhausted, not just because we were there for hours, but because it was emotionally draining. The conventions reminded us how much the fans loved us, and how much we loved the fans. When Peter left the convention in Los Angeles, he went home and picked up the phone and called Ace, and told him what a rush it was and how great it felt. Ace expressed an interest in participating too. As we went along on the convention trail, people started to talk about them. The word of mouth was tremendous. At some point, MTV sent crews out, and one of the people to take notice was a guy named Alex Coletti, the producer of MTV's Unplugged series. We had been filming every one of these conventions because we wanted to put out a long-form video about them. Coletti saw the tape of fans getting up on stage and jamming with us, and people crying. Why doesn't KISS bring its convention to the MTV studios and do an episode of Unplugged? He said. Paul and I talked about it and decided to invite Peter and Ace to join us, not for the New York KISS convention, but for the Unplugged taping. We would have the entire KISS lineup: Eric, Bruce, Ace, Peter, Gene, and Paul. And when Ace and Peter went on, Eric and Bruce would be off stage, out of respect for them, so they could sing their songs. Then we'd all get together and do one or two together as a band. When I called Peter to tell him about it, he jumped at the opportunity right away. When I called Ace, he said, "That sounds great. Thanks so much for calling me. My manager is George Sewitt." George Sewitt was initially our security guy. He was very adept in martial arts. Then, somehow, he had expanded into management and started representing Ace and Vinnie Vincent. When Vinnie Vincent left, Sewitt took on another client, Peter Criss. As a result of Ace using Sewitt as a go-between, the negotiations for this one-off KISS reunion on Unplugged became all-consuming for me. I had daily discussions with Sewitt about the fact that there wouldn't be any pay, that we were just doing this for MTV, that we would play just 2 songs with the band, that we would retain the rights to release the performance as a long-form video, and so forth. Part of what took so long was my own meticulousness. I'm all about making a list and checking it twice. Other people let lawyers take over. I don't. But another reason the negotiations became so protracted was Ace himself. Initially, Ace said, "Sure, I'll show up with my guitar and we'll do a couple of songs together. That's great. I look forward to it. Thanks so much." And then came a series of conversations where Ace wanted a suite, and then a pair of roadies, and then $5,000 for guitar strings and popcorn and peanuts. Then he wanted another suite for his daughter. At one point, George Suet was calling MTV directly. I immediately cut him off at the pass. "You're not to call MTV," I said. "You don't represent KISS, and this is a KISS show. We will let you know where to go and what time to show up. You may be Ace's manager, but please don't get confused about what that means." I had to be stern because MTV would listen to anybody who represented themselves as being part of KISS. The left hand was the same as the right hand in their estimation. Even though Paul and I were trying to keep on the best friendly face, dealing with Ace and George Suet was torture. The deal kept changing every single day. And with Peter, it was always walking on thin ice because he was shaky emotionally. He was alone at that point, between marriages. His daughter was on the West Coast with his former wife, who didn't have the kindest things to say about Peter. We had no problems with the rest of the guys. Through the entire reunion process, Bruce and Eric were terrific. They were the sweetest, most professional guys. They never said anything bad about anybody. They always did their job, always showed up on time. They were real gentlemen who put their egos aside for the good of the fans. In fact, they were so accommodating that they planted the seeds for what would become their worst nightmare. Their kindness enabled Ace and Peter to step in and, unfortunately, put them out of a job. We rehearsed at SIR Studios in New York. Peter walked in with his head down, and we immediately hugged him and told him to have a good time. Then Ace walked in, and we started working. It became very clear immediately that Ace's guitar playing had sunk to a club level, and we made sure that Eric Singer played drums along with Peter just to keep him in time. But no matter what the problems were, whenever it was time for them to come on, Ace stepped up and that magic thing happened. Despite all the problems, despite all the torture, when we played together, it felt like 1974 again. We weren't as good as we were with Eric or Bruce, not as proficient or as tuneful, but we had a kind of swagger. A loose rock and roll thing that perhaps the Stones have always been more about than the Beatles. The fans loved it. It looked great. Afterward, we shook hands and wished each other luck. We didn't think for a second about reforming the band, mainly because we had to fly to Los Angeles to mix our new album, Carnival of Souls. The conventions had reminded me that our fans were among the most passionate in the world. Plenty of other rock stars were KISS fans, too, either openly or secretly, and one day I got an idea for a KISS tribute album. I wanted the top stars of the day to play their favorite KISS songs. Paul didn't get it, and didn't think the record company would go for it. They did. Paul and I went to New York and sold it as a KISS record so that we could get our millions in advance, despite the fact that the band ended up appearing on only one song. Then on my own, I started making all the calls. One of the first was to Neil Young, through his manager Elliot Roberts, who must have thought I was on crack. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You want Neil Young to appear on a KISS tribute album?" And I said, "That's right, why shouldn't he?" I made the same calls to Madonna's people because I wanted her to cover I Was Made for Loving You, and on and on. I worked the phones for about 10 hours a day for 2 months straight, calling everybody in the universe. I lined up Ozzy Osbourne to team up with Stone Temple Pilots on War Machine. I got 9 Inch Nails to agree to a cover of Love Gun. I had Sir Mix-a-Lot doing a rap version of Rock and Roll All Night. I didn't care if they were my taste or not. I wanted a stellar lineup because at the end I'm all about winning the prize. How you get there doesn't matter. The conception of the project was beautiful. The execution was trickier, mainly because the record companies got in the way. One of their complaints was that I wasn't paying the bands very much to do the tracks. My attitude was that it was just for fun, that they should get into the studio and knock something out and see if it worked. Many of the musicians agreed with me. Lenny Kravitz, for example, did a cover of Deuce, and after he sent the tape, he told me he had this fantasy of Stevie Wonder playing harmonica on the track. So I called Stevie. I had met him only once when Diana Ross and I went to see him at Wembley in London, but he got on the telephone and immediately agreed. He and his assistant came down to Cherokee Studios, and I put on the Lenny Kravitz song, and he said, "Okay, what do you want me to play?" All of a sudden, this voice in my head said, "Oh my God, I'm going to be telling Stevie Wonder what to play on his harp." I improvised a little melody, and he played it back immediately. Finally, I said, "You know what? I feel awkward telling Stevie Wonder to do anything. Why don't you just do what you do? Just let the song go by. I'll play it twice, then just put down what you feel." Within 2 or 3 takes, he did it, and thank you very much. He is a genius. The other big coup was getting Garth Brooks. Garth came through Paul, who had met him, and when I first spoke with Garth, he agreed to contribute a song to the record on one condition, that Kiss back him up on Hard Luck Woman. We flew into Nashville at night, didn't tell anybody. We had no bodyguards. We carried our own guitars. Garth was a complete gentleman. The whole studio was opened up for us. The song went smoothly. As it turned out, Garth was a huge Kiss fan. Queen and Kiss were his main influences when he was growing up. I had never seen the connection before, but that's because I knew Garth only from his records. When I finally saw him in concert, I understood what he was talking about. He was flying through the air, levitating the drums, shooting off fireworks. It was country Kiss. Even during this project, which was a tremendous amount of fun, the old Kiss problems cropped up again. Paul came up with an idea for the cover, a takeoff on the cover of Led Zeppelin's Presence, which shows a family sitting together at a table. We wanted to do a similar cover, but put the whole family in Kiss makeup. So Paul went down to a photo house, and we found a picture of an American family and put everybody's face in makeup. Somehow word got out, and somebody from Ace's camp called and told us that we couldn't use Ace's makeup. We checked the contracts, and the truth was that we were well within our rights. We owned the spaceman. But I didn't want to fight with Ace, so we decided to change the makeup. We went out of our way to make Ace and Peter feel good about the project. On the inside cover art, a handwritten note to the two of them said, "Dear Ace and Peter, hope you are well. This whole thing couldn't have happened without you." It was a very friendly note, very honest. When the album Kiss My Ass came out, it did very well and became another platinum record for us. We played with Garth on The Tonight Show, and life continued to be stress-free without Ace and Peter. By the 1990s, grunge music was the most popular style of rock and roll. Thanks to bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden, it was dominant on the airwaves and on MTV. While we were making Carnival of Souls, we made a conscious effort to reinvent ourselves again, this time with swampy guitars and more alienation in the lyrics. The result wasn't very convincing. We enjoyed making it. We had plenty of interesting times. We learned more about this new style and about our own musical abilities. But as we mixed the record, we realized that that version of Kiss had run its course. I called George Suett to explore whether Ace and Peter, both of whom were now chemical-free, I was told, were up for a reunion. Direct communication with Ace and Peter was always difficult. Neither of them had people skills, and they never answered their phones. Peter always had a roadie who would be his mouthpiece, and Ace always liked to have a manager or a keeper around him. I told George that I would fly to New York to meet him at our lawyer's office, although the lawyer wouldn't be present, just George and me. At that meeting, I told him what Kiss would be willing to offer Ace for rejoining the band for a tour. I showed him how much ticket prices would run, how many people I thought would show up at the concerts, what the capacity of the concert halls would be, and so on. George studied the figure and then said, "Well, that's an offer, but how come it's not bigger?" "Because," I said, "this is not a negotiation. This is an offer of employment. For 15 years, I explained, we'd gotten along fine. We had made Kiss into a very big international band without makeup, without Ace, and without Peter. The only way we would even think about letting the two of them back in was under an employment agreement. We were not interested in being partners. If Ace wanted to come on board and become a multimillionaire yet again, we'd be happy to have him. We offered the same to Peter. This was a guaranteed number, I explained. If the tour bombed, Paul and I would be on the hook. If it worked out, we might win big. Either way, Ace was guaranteed to be a multimillionaire. George and I parted cordially. I told him he had 2 or 3 days to decide. To George's credit, he saw the big picture, and shortly thereafter called me to say, "It's a deal." Ace and Peter both flew out to Los Angeles and came to my guest house for a band meeting. I told everybody how happy I was to do this, how thrilled I was that we had come to an agreement. Then Ace turned around and reneged. "I don't care what you give Peter," he said. "I want more." Peter was beside himself, because it was the same old stuff again, the 2 weaker members of the band playing off each other. Our instinct was to flatly say no to this demand. But we didn't want the deal to dissipate, so we agreed. The next day Ace changed the deal again. "I want an equal split," he said. We said, "That's the end of the deal. Thank you very much. Goodbye. It's been nice knowing you. God bless." Ace then backpedaled, explained that he had to have more than Peter, even if it was only slightly more. He kept insisting, and still does, that he was much more important than Peter. This was all about self-esteem. This was classic Ace. We always wondered whether he would do the work he said he would do and stand by the agreements he entered. We probably had legal standing to sue Ace, but despite all the dysfunctional elements, we've always looked at KISS as a family. We had once sued Polygram Records and won. We had sued Howard Marks, our former business manager, and won. We have yet to lose a suit. But we didn't want to resort to that with either Ace or Peter. Once the band did finally get together, once the numbers were set, I personally typed up a list of conditions. First, whether the tour was doing well or miserably, we could pull the plug at any time. Period. Also, all band members were to show up on time. They were to do interviews when asked. There were going to be strenuous rehearsals. Peter's drumming had deteriorated to an unacceptable level, and he could not remember his parts. Likewise, Ace's guitar playing had become a shadow of its former self. Ace's memory did not serve him well either. Decades of self-abuse had, in my opinion, taken their toll. Tommy Thayer, who had been in a KISS tribute band after Black and Blue, knew all of Ace's solos inside out, and he had to teach them back to Ace. We insisted that there would be a workout regimen with personal trainers every morning, and then arduous rehearsals with no drugs and no booze. If anyone used, they were gone. Right away, Ace broke almost every rule. Peter, to his credit, showed up on time and worked hard. But Ace didn't show up on time. He didn't talk to the press. By the second or third week of rehearsals, I faxed George Sewitt saying, "We're ready to pull the plug. Ace Frehley is not a team player." George Sewitt suggested we have a heart-to-heart with Ace. So Paul, Ace, and I met at the Sunset Marquee about a month into rehearsals. Ace was full of excuses. His dog was sick. He was having trouble with his family. The government was hassling him about taxes. But he agreed to settle down. We were without a manager at that point, but we needed one. It became clear that this tour was going to be much bigger in scope than we'd expected. I called up ICM, CAA, and the major booking agencies to test the waters, to see what percentage we could get from a booking agency. I explained that KISS was reuniting and that we were interested in having a manager come on board, but that we were not interested in paying a percentage of gross, only net. We had come too far along in this business. We knew too much. Nobody was going to get a percentage of the gross before we paid expenses. They could participate after we paid all the expenses, but there was no way they would make more money than we would. At some point in the search for a manager, I suggested Doc McGee. We had given Motley Crue and Bon Jovi their first tours, and Doc had managed them both. We made him an offer, stressing that the terms weren't really flexible. He accepted. Right away, Doc's involvement paid dividends. While talking to an agent in CAA, he came up with this idea that we should appear on the Grammy Awards, not perform, not even say a word, just appear in full makeup and costumes next to Tupac Shakur. If you do that, Doc said, then people will know the band is back together. That's exactly what we did. There was no press, no nothing. We sidled right up to Tupac, who was going to present an award. By that point, the word had leaked. A few minutes before, we'd passed by the backstage green room, where all the stars hang out and wait for their turn to get up in front of the microphone. Everybody was there, from Gloria Estefan to Luther Vandross. As we passed by the green room, all the stars went into shock. "Hey, look," someone said. Then the whole green room erupted with applause. Once we saw how these celebrities reacted, without any prompting, then we knew this was real. Before a single ticket was sold, before a single review was written, we knew it was the right time. The planets had lined up. Tupac announced to the audience that he had a surprise, and we walked out onto the stage. The first guy who jumped up was Eddie Vedder. Then the whole crowd jumped to its feet. We were back. Forever. Reunions and Farewells, 1996 to 2001. The Grammy Awards ceremony was the beginning of our comeback trail. Within about a month, Doc decided to book Detroit's Tiger Stadium as the first show. It sounded like the height of lunacy to us. The safe way would have been to test our act in a smaller market, someplace like Dothan, Alabama, where we could sharpen our act, and the problems in the show wouldn't be scrutinized quite so intensely. But Doc booked a baseball stadium in Detroit. To be honest, we weren't even sure we would sell out the show. Tickets went on sale one Friday night. At 6 in the morning on Saturday, Doc called me at home to tell me that he had some good news and some bad news. I asked him for the bad news first. "Well," he said, "we don't have any more tickets to sell." We had sold out the whole stadium, about 50,000 seats, out in under an hour. I immediately called Peter and told him. He said, yeah, in a voice that made me believe he was still half asleep or didn't understand what I was telling him, but by the end of the conversation, he was hooting and hollering. Peter was so jubilant that for a minute I thought this tour might go smoothly. But it wasn't to be. We had a photo session with Barry Levine, who had worked with us back in 1976, and Ace complained that it was taking too long. Though we had intense personal training sessions with weights and aerobics to prepare us for the concerts, halfway through his session, Ace would stop. Peter didn't stop, but every step of the way he complained that the guy who was working him out was too demanding. Once Ace walked up to me in the parking lot of the rehearsal hall and said, "I still don't have my weekly check, and if I don't get it by 5 o'clock today, I'm quitting the band." He always thought, and still does, that people are trying to cheat him. To Ace, it was always a conspiracy to do him in. Ace Frehley, more than anyone else in the band, seems to have a dark cloud over his head. He was and continues to be fearless in almost everything he does. In some ways, it's a quality I've always found fascinating because I don't have it myself. Where I am overly cautious about my health, Ace is the extreme opposite. He would drink until he passed out. He has used enough drugs to kill a lesser man. He has always been and continues to be unrepentant about all of that. He never cared about the effect his behavior had on anything or anyone, on the band, his personal relationships, or his health. I have to admit to being completely stumped. If someone were to jump off a building to commit suicide, at least he or she would have an audience. Ace prefers privacy, though. He never minded numbing himself alone. In fact, he seemed to relish the idea of going back to his room and knocking himself out. He would spend off days in his room and never come up for air. But despite all the self-destructive behavior, Ace is bright. He would tinker with little gadgets. He actually designed and built his own rocket-shooting device for his guitar in the early days, when the band was first touring. I was in the dressing room watching Ace solder wiring on his guitar for his effect, and as he turned to face me, I saw him solder his thumb to the guitar. When he felt pain, he screamed and yanked his hand away, but part of the skin of his thumb remained soldered to his guitar. Ace and Peter both have managed to cheat death more times than I can count. When Kiss opened up one of our early tours in Florida, in the days when guitars were still connected to amplifiers by jacks, electric wire connectors, Ace was electrocuted on stage in front of the audience, but rejoined us within a few minutes to finish the show. Peter was once hit with an M80 firework that was thrown on stage and was knocked off his drum riser. He had to be taken to the hospital. After he returned, the show went on. Ace has been chased by the police at speeds of 100 miles per hour and has walked away from crashes reasonably intact. He and Peter have both been in a number of terrible accidents and should have been killed. But Paul and I had put up with much of that throughout the years, and we were prepared to deal with it again. Before the Tiger Stadium tickets went up on sale in 1996, Doc McGee wanted to do a press conference in New York, and he had this idea of doing it at the New York Public Library on 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. I understood his rationale. He wanted a place that was easily accessible to all the national press, but I didn't want that locale. Libraries have nothing to do with Kiss. Instead, I suggested that we go to the United Nations, which could represent Kiss's global reach. Doc liked that, but he couldn't get the right permits. Then I remembered that in 1981, Diana Ross had gone on to the USS Intrepid aircraft carrier for a small press conference. I suggested to Doc that we do a Kiss press conference on the Intrepid, which is permanently moored in the Hudson River on Manhattan's west side. Even though it was raining, the event was a huge success. Conan O'Brien introduced us, and we managed to attract television and press from 52 countries. When we took questions, I made sure that we had big signs in front of us with our names. Ace thought I was crazy. He thought everyone knew who he was. I had to explain to him that some countries didn't have any idea who Kiss was anymore. Amazingly, at the press conference itself, Ace came off fine. Better than fine, in fact. He was very charming, very self-effacing. Those moments of good behavior were rare, though. We took over Cobo Hall in Detroit, where we had recorded a live to rehearse for the Tiger Stadium show. Peter, Paul, and I, plus the road crew and everybody else, got there and got settled. While we were unpacking, someone came up and told me that Ace had not yet made it to Detroit. This was to be the first day of rehearsal for our biggest tour in almost 2 decades, and he couldn't get there on time. We booked him another flight, and he missed that one too. Then we booked a third one, which he also missed. When Ace finally walked into rehearsal and said something about how hard it was to pack, I basically tore him a new asshole. I told him he was a loser, that this was his last chance to get on his feet. I told him that he should be ashamed of himself, keeping the entire band and crew waiting. If you can't do the job, I said, get the fuck out. Ace exploded right back at me and told me to go fuck myself. Then he left. When he was gone, Paul turned to me and asked me to smooth things over. He'll listen to you, he said. So I had to swallow my pride and go out there and say in a gentle tone, look, Ace, whatever else is going on in your life, you owe it to your fans to show them that you can still be a great guitar god. This appealed to him, and he came back and started rehearsing. It didn't stop him from showing up late at other times, though. At around this time, I wanted a band biography to be written for the reunion tour, and I wanted someone famous to do it. I tried to get Stephen King, but he was unavailable. Then I tried Steven Spielberg, but he was also unavailable. Then I thought about Bob Guccione, the editor of Spin. At that point, Spin was every bit as big as Rolling Stone. So even though we had once sued Guccione for printing and distributing an illegal and unauthorized Kiss magazine in the 1970s, he took my call, and we chatted. He agreed to write the bio, which would be a short thing, like a press release. Along the way, I told Guccione about our reunion tour and the fact that we were getting back together. I wanted him to put us on the cover of Spin. He thought it was a good idea, although he wasn't sure it should be the whole band. He wanted a cover picture of me, alone. While talking to him, I saw a larger opportunity, and the idea just started flying out of my mouth. I ended up pitching him on a collector's edition set of 4 identical Kiss covers, one for each of us. The Kiss fans will want to buy all 4 of them, I said. When the 4 solo covers of Spin came out, I brought them into rehearsals at Cobo Hall in Detroit before our first performance to show Ace and Peter that I was pushing the band, not myself. As long as I live, I'll never forget Ace's reaction. He picked up his solo cover and said, "I fucking hate this. This sucks. I'm leaving the band." And he walked out. He later came back calmer and explained that he didn't like his photograph. By the end of the day, he was looking around and asking us if we really thought his picture looked okay. Subsequently, I learned that Guccione had printed 60% Gene Simmons covers and 25% Paul Stanley covers. The remaining 15% was divided between Ace and Peter covers. It was not the equal printing everyone thought it was. The first leg of our reunion tour lasted 193 shows and ran over 2 years. It was a triumph in every way. At the end of 1997, we were playing in New Jersey, and Dick Clark, ever the gentleman, asked us if we would ring in the new year. We had become the #1 touring band. #2 was our good friend Garth Brooks. The reaction was so tremendous that for the Millennium New Year's Eve, Dick Clark decided to rebroadcast the footage. For all the wonderful feeling that passed between the band and the fans, the old problems were cropping up again. You think people will change. You hope they will change. You expect them to mature, to learn from their mistakes. But they don't. Ace would constantly ask questions about the number of people showing up at the concerts. These would be concerts in places we had played before, and the halls and stadiums hadn't changed in size. But he wanted to know whether anybody was hiding any tickets. Astonishingly, Ace was oblivious to the fact that he had a flat deal. If nobody showed up, or if it sold out, he still got the same amount of money for each show he played. If he didn't play, he didn't get paid. I kept repeating that to him every time he asked. I didn't understand why he was agonizing over it. Then I found out that he wasn't just asking me. He would ask Doc, our manager, how many people showed up tonight, and Doc would say, "Oh, I don't know, maybe 15,000 people." Then Ace would produce a piece of paper from the concert hall, a schematic that showed the seating arrangements. On the bottom, it would say, "Capacity, 19,000." And he would bring me the paper and shake his head and say, "See? More lies." Keep in mind it said capacity. But it was just like Ace to ignore that, or not to know what capacity meant. It seemed as if he didn't understand the difference between capacity and attendance, or that because our stage show was so big, we had to kill 3,000 or 4,000 seats. Peter, for his part, retained a frustrating inability to understand press coverage. Articles would appear about the band, and Peter would be furious at me. He'd come up and confront me and say, "What the fuck did you say about me here?" I would take a look, thinking that maybe I had been misquoted. I hadn't. Before the interview, the reporter had written his introduction, and maybe he would mention that Peter had known drug problems or had been bankrupt. This was the writer's voice, not mine, but to Peter it was the same thing. Now that the band had reunited and I was spending more time with Peter and Ace, I was starting to see the effect 20 years of heavy drug and alcohol use had had. Ace had lost much of his memory. He has been quoted in magazines and has said directly to me that he literally doesn't remember entire decades of his life. I would like to think of that as a rock and roll exaggeration, but I have seen much evidence of memory loss. For example, Ace would come up and tell me a joke, and then come by a little later and try to tell me the same joke again, but not remember how it went. Peter also suffered from memory loss, but the difference between the two has been striking. There would often be moments of clarity on Peter's part when we were on tour. He would tell me how he had gone wrong, and that this would be the first day of the rest of his life. He was tired of fighting his demons. He was tired of trying to show the world that he was a badass. He had been through 2 divorces that broke him spiritually and financially. He would speak very openly about wanting to change, and for some of the tour it was fun being around him. He would aid us in trying to keep Ace on the straight and narrow, saying things to Ace like, "You're a father. What's your daughter going to say? I've been through the same stuff you've been through. It doesn't work. I don't want to go back to playing clubs, do you? It's time to straighten up." Unfortunately, it didn't work. Later on, when Peter's insecurities kicked in and he saw that he had made millions of dollars from just one tour, he started to wonder why he hadn't made more, despite the fact that the contract he signed outlined exactly what, when, and how everyone was to be paid. When he got like that, he would team up with Ace, and he'd be back to the Peter who had tortured me from the beginning. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when this happened. Peter was just too unpredictable. I had witnessed his unpredictability firsthand throughout our years together. For example, Peter once shot my television set. While he was trying to separate from his first wife, I let him use my apartment so he could hide out with his playmate of the month, whom he seemed crazy about. I gave him the key and the run of the house. When I came back, I noticed that my 6-foot television screen seemed bigger and newer. It was. It was now a 7-foot television screen. When I looked behind the screen, I saw that part of the wall had been repainted. I found out that Peter and this woman, who had become his second wife, had been watching TV. Peter, for some reason, had his .357 revolver out. When an actor's face appeared on the screen and he heard his girlfriend had known the actor, he shot the screen. It wasn't the first time he'd done something stupid with a gun. When the band was on hiatus over the holidays, during Peter's first marriage, he shot the tree out from under his first wife as she decorated it. Ace and Peter may have tended toward this kind of behavior, but their weaknesses were exacerbated by their management. Both of them were still managed by George Sewitt, and he was, more and more in my opinion, acting the role of the band's management. I had in no uncertain terms told him not to do this. When we were playing the MTV Music Awards at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, I saw George giving directions to some New York policeman. I went over to him and said, "George, stop it." Unfortunately, I think he was under the direction of Ace, who kept telling him to do whatever he could to promote him rather than the band. At the end of the day, Sewitt almost got Ace and Peter into a nightmarish financial situation. I urged Ace to get some help. Although I'm not a financial advisor, in my opinion, it looked like a sinkhole and would leave Ace holding the bag. When he did get some outside advice, they told him that it was the worst deal they'd ever seen. Ace and Peter parted company with Sewitt, and they soon sued each other. There are still claims pending. After the split with George Sewitt, Ace and Peter started to separate. Peter, because he straightened up a bit, would often see how Ace showed up late or didn't show up at all. He would sometimes turn to me and say, "Don't get angry with him, he's bombed." Other times he would turn to Ace in a meeting and say, "You can't bullshit a bullshitter. You're high. I can see it in you." A number of times I was surprised by Peter's honesty and clarity. As Ace lost Peter as his buddy, he withdrew. Despite Peter's drug past, when he did come back to the band after '96, he was for the most part straight. He showed up and tried to do his work, although his attitude was always that of a complainer. In time, Kiss was called upon to deliver another album to the record company. When I say Kiss, I mean Paul and me. We were the only real members of the band. Ace and Peter were not signatories to the contract. Bob Ezrin, who'd been with us before in Good Times, Destroyer, and Bad, The Elder, started working on a new album, which we called Circus. But after a while it became obvious to us and to Bob himself that he was too busy with his internet company. During the initial rehearsals, he didn't think his contributions were as good as they should have been, and he took himself out of the picture. Then Bruce Fairbairn, a producer who had been successful with bands like Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, and Loverboy, among others, came to meet with us in Winnipeg, Canada. We explained to him that it was going to be a nightmare. Needless to say, from the beginning to the end, he was tortured by Ace and Peter, who tried yet again to change the contract and didn't show up for most of the record. We had to use Tommy Thayer, Bruce Kulick, Kevin Valentine, and others in their place. Bruce got us through the process and helped us to make a good, solid Kiss record, one that debuted at #1 in many countries around the world. Unfortunately, within the year, Bruce Fairbairn was found dead in his house in Vancouver. That was the last Kiss studio album, and it may be the last one ever. We have enough unreleased material to keep fans satisfied for quite some time, in the form of rarities, demos, and so forth, but it would take an earth-shaking event to get us back into the studio. In the current market, there's no real place for a new Kiss album, and I'm not interested in making an album that doesn't succeed. During that Psycho Circus period, I had another once-in-a-lifetime experience when I hooked up with Bob Dylan and ended up co-writing a song with him. We weren't put together by anyone else. I just looked up Dylan's number, called his manager, and said that I had long been an admirer. I had never spoken to Dylan, never met him. He came to my guest house in Beverly Hills, and the whole experience was very cordial. I spent about 2 minutes telling him how important he was to music in general, and to me personally. He's a very easygoing guy, but he doesn't say much. Then we sat down, picked up acoustic guitars, and traded licks back and forth. He had something I liked, I had something he liked, and so on. When we recorded the song, he was nice enough to come down to the demo studio. Since then, I've been begging him to write the lyric. He keeps telling me that I should do it. Can you imagine that? Bob Dylan is telling me to write lyrics. The 1998 Psycho Circus tour kicked off at Dodger Stadium, the first 3D tour in history. You got your ticket, and you got your glasses, which at various points in the show would make it seem three-dimensional off the screen at the back of the stage. Between concerts, we flew on our own Gulfstream jet with all the amenities. We stayed in the best hotels, and when we had a day off in Texas, Ace decided to visit his Texas cousins. They actually resembled him, but spoke with drawls like the Beverly Hillbillies. They were nice enough and said that Ace would stay with them on their farm. I imagined Ace on horseback, but I didn't want to think too much about it. Later I heard Ace was in the hospital, and word got out that he had shot himself. It seemed Ace decided to go shooting with an Uzi, an Israeli machine gun designed to shoot hundreds of rounds per second. There was a time when it was the fastest and deadliest weapon of its kind. Apparently, from Ace's explanation, one of the bullets backfired and a piece of shrapnel lodged in his chest. When he felt better, I asked him why he went shooting with a machine gun in the first place, and he actually responded in so many words. Yeah, well, if you Israelis knew how to build a machine gun, this never would have happened to me. Ace generally needed diversions. He had flown in a bodyguard to keep him company. Ace's reasons for companionship, be it girlfriend or bodyguard, were usually to get him ice for his drinks, pack his bags, or be his playmate when he was in the mood to cause mischief. While we were at the same hotel where he had the machine gun incident, he bought paintball guns, and he and his bodyguard shot at each other inside the hotel suite. Afterward, we found out that the suite was a complete disaster. The walls and furniture were covered with paint. A blanket had apparently been dropped in a bathtub full of water, for God knows what purpose. The hotel banned Kiss from all Four Seasons hotels nationwide. It took some doing to explain to the hotel that only one of us had the mental capacity to actually conceive of having a paintball fight indoors, and that the person would be most happy to pay for the damages. The hotel quickly gave Ace a bill of approximately $10,000. He countered by saying he would sue them for any number of reasons. This was classic Ace. Everyone was trying to get him. He was the innocent victim. This feeling of persecution depressed him. He couldn't understand why his domestic life seemed to be in such turmoil. He couldn't understand why the government was after him for unpaid taxes. He couldn't understand why Canada always made him go through such a ritual before they let him into the country. The fact that the rest of the group had to wait around for hours while we pleaded with the Canadian government that Ace's drug busts were a thing of the past was completely lost on him. Ace always blames the government or fate or anything or anyone but himself when things go wrong. We were touring the world but not having a good time doing it. The chemicals had started to handicap Ace even more, and he had a girlfriend who seemed to tolerate willingly this lifestyle. Peter, too, succumbed to his inner demons. He went back to being the moaner, the nickname given to him by a former road manager. We still had a few tricks up our sleeves, though, or at least I did. I called Hugh Hefner, who's a friend of mine, and told him I was in discussions with Penthouse for a Kiss cover, and that I wanted to let him know about it because we were close to a deal. He told me to forget Penthouse, and he would put the group on the cover of Playboy, if we had an angle. I suggested the Girls of Kiss. The photos and article would be about the female Kiss fans who delighted in going to our shows, showing us their breasts, and throwing their undies and bras on stage. He loved it. Under the wonderful guidance of Marilyn Grabowski, the word went out, and about 30 girls came, undressed, and put on their Kiss makeup. We had the kind of photo session guys can only dream of. When Playboy appeared on the stands in March 1999, I was on the cover alone with 4 girls. The band, especially Ace and Peter, believed it was another one of my schemes. They had expected and demanded to be on the cover. When Playboy was about to come out, Kiss had the coveted spot on the Super Bowl telecast, seen around the world by 1 billion people. 550 girls in Kiss makeup joined us as we lip-synced Rock and Roll All Night. Our fireworks and rockets were ultra-charged, since the sky was the limit, and we showed the Super Bowl and the world how it should be done. We were the openers. After Kiss, Cher sang the national anthem. We saw each other later that night and reminisced about the great times we had had. She had just come off the biggest single of her career and was feeling great. While we were at the Super Bowl, I arranged to meet with Linda and Vince McMahon, the owners and creators of the World Wrestling Federation. I pitched them the idea of a Kiss wrestler called The Demon. I've been to hell and back. I told him that we could follow it up with the Star Child, who was too pretty for his own good, but could kick butt, and so on. Then we could introduce female versions of Kiss, Lady Demon, Wild Child, and so on, and then Kiss Kids. While I was negotiating the licensing and merchandising slices we wanted on the back end, I was also talking to World Championship Wrestling, the rival wrestling outfit. In the end, I took the better of the 2 deals and went with WCW. It was a win-win situation for us, because Kiss retained all licensing and merchandising rights. WCW did all the work, and we reaped all the rewards. The debut event for The Demon came as we were at our wits' end by the end of our tour and were about to call it quits. We flew to Las Vegas to play one song, God of Thunder, at the MGM Grand for the debut, and made an enormous amount of money. It seemed like it should have been the easiest thing in the world, but with Ace and Peter, nothing was easy. The misery of it was like pulling teeth. Paul and I talked and finally decided to go out and do one more tour and then call it a day. This wasn't such a crazy thought. The comeback, which began in '96, was always a 5-year plan. Emotionally for me and Paul, and by contrast for Ace and Peter. By the end of 1999, it was becoming very clear that physically, neither Ace nor Peter could endure too much more, and Paul and I didn't know how much more of them we could stand. We really didn't have much more to prove either. By 1999, Kiss had scaled the heights. We'd been on the cover of Forbes magazine, had broken every box office record, and stood proudly right behind the Beatles in the number of gold record awards by a group. We had gotten our own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. We were wax figures in the Hollywood Wax Museum. We had done what we had always dreamed of doing. And although I had been very frugal all my life, I was now for the first time loosening the purse strings. Times had certainly changed. I had bought a car. I had bought property. I had cautiously dug my roots into the ground. I had 2 gorgeous kids who looked up to me. I was living with a living doll. But one thing hadn't changed. I still wasn't married. I had taken flack for that from friends, usually women. But it was the only way I knew to feel safe. I didn't want to fall into the trap of simply living my life by society's or anyone else's rules. As I said earlier, I really wanted my kids to have both of their parents' names. I did not want Shannon to take on my last name. I find it insulting to women that they would agree to throw away their last names and assume their husbands, like property. This is my car, this is my wife. I wanted none of that. I wanted Shannon to be her own person, decide her own destiny, and go after every woman desire she ever had, without having to check with the man. As much as I was trying to fight the conventional nuclear family, here I was, crazy about the mother of my kids. As of this writing, we've been together for 18 years. We have yet to raise a hand or our voices to each other. We often wonder if there's something wrong with us. We never fight about anything. So I let my guard down further and dug my roots deeper. I decided to build a 16,500 square foot home with enough room for everyone and my work. It would have 4 levels on 2 acres with trees, a tennis court, and a waterfall. Building it would take 3 years. In the meantime, we had a farewell tour to complete. The farewell tour kicked off in Phoenix, Arizona on March 11, 2000. The stage set was a bigger, bolder version of the reunion tour, with 3 huge screens and 2 huge Kiss logos. It was an over-the-top version of what we'd been doing for 25 years. We opened with a film about the band, then moved right into Shout It Out Loud. The set was a strong mix of greatest hits and new material, the songs fans wanted to hear. I'm not sure if anyone believed that it was really a farewell tour. People were crying in the audience. But maybe it wasn't because they were never going to see us again. Maybe it was because Ace and Peter were playing so badly. As the tour went on, it became clear to me that the decision to make this tour the last one was not only smart, but maybe inevitable. Musically, it was the worst we had ever been, but the amount of fan worship was tremendous. Many of the fans were celebrities. Russell Crowe came out to Austin, Texas. LL Cool J flew out to see us. The farewell tour also found Kiss solidifying its marketing deals. In fact, we took the opportunity to push our corporate connections to a new level. To my mind, one of the most interesting things about the band was the fact that we were never afraid to admit that we were in the rock and roll business. From the beginning, from 1973, I was less interested in respect, which can be here today and gone tomorrow, than in brand. Did people have enough interest in what we did to go out there and buy something associated with us? From the beginning, Paul was always more interested in credibility. I knew that credibility was fleeting. You can argue from now until the end of time whether something or someone is respected, but one thing you can't argue with is sales. I think fans sometimes sided with Paul. Some of them perceived our obsession with marketing ourselves as characters to be sort of juvenile. Way before anyone else was doing this, we stuck questionnaires in our albums. We wanted to know where the fans lived and what magazines they read. If we were going to take out an ad in a magazine, we didn't want to take it out in the wrong one. One way to find out which magazines people read is to ask them. My awareness of these practices went back to my childhood, to my own days as a pop culture fanatic. Since I loved Superman, I would certainly watch the TV show and buy not only the comic book, but anything that Superman endorsed. The same held true for Disney. Disney is not just the theme park and cartoons. It is anything you can imagine, from pillows to pajamas to videos. Mickey Mouse started out as a cartoon, then became a part of America. Whether Mickey Mouse is respected or not is such a small issue. When you're too big to argue with, you can make your own rules. Is Elvis credible or not? Who cares? The question is moot. You may think Santa Claus doesn't have any credibility, but at a certain time of the year, he rules. That's what I wanted for Kiss, to make such a big impact that authenticity or credibility would be beside the point. At around this time, Pepsi approached us with an idea for a broad music-based TV marketing campaign that would use artists from all different kinds of music, from country to rock and everything in between. The commercials would star Hallie Eisenberg, a child actress, and include a country segment where she sang with a country singer, a soul segment where she sang with Aretha Franklin, and so on. Pepsi approached us at the end of 1999 and at the beginning of the so-called farewell tour. While we were in Phoenix, we filmed it. Not only did VH1 come down and shoot the beginning of the farewell tour, but the day before, we spent about 10 hours on the same stage filming the commercial. They only showed it a few times, and then as a corporate decision, Pepsi started to show the country version of the commercial instead. The problem was that when the Pepsi people did a test with their own focus group, it was 90% for us and only 10% for country. So they came back and started to play the commercial again. At the same time, ABC decided to use Rock and Roll All Night as the theme music for its fall schedule. The Pepsi deal was only the most recent in a long line of corporate associations. The very first one was for a Kiss Honda bike, kind of a Japanese Harley-Davidson. Many corporations around the country were scared of an association with us. We had no illusions about our corporate identity. We're like any other corporation. Some rock bands are delusional. They say they're a people's band, but even they don't perform for free. Whether you have long hair or razor blades in your eyeballs, you're a corporation. Kiss broke all the rules and ended up on the cover of Playboy and Fortune. We've never made any bones about the fact that the American dream is about not only fame, but also riches. Money does not make you a happier person. It's not everything. But it's better to have more money than less. Americans, by and large, feel a little awkward talking about money or showing it off when they have it. That's why the richest men in the country walk around in jeans. When a band that has sold millions of records walks on stage in jeans, it's every bit as much a costume as Kiss costumes. Each outfit is carefully designed to elicit a certain reaction. I'm here to tell you it's all good. We don't hide behind that mask. We worked hard. Bands have come out and said that we're corporate while they have integrity and they can point fingers, but the IRS makes no distinction. When you make money, it's called earned income. As a rock band, you are a business, and you have to seize every opportunity to promote your product. In the winter of 2001, as we were getting ready to embark on the Japanese and Australian leg of our farewell tour, Peter demanded a new deal. But we had a contract with him and weren't willing to meet these new demands. Peter held his ground and told us that we could take it or leave it. We left it. At the end of the day, Peter Criss is still the very same guy who, even before our first show at the Diplomat Hotel in 1973, a show where we scratched and clawed to get people there, was ready to quit the band. Why? Because he was disappointed that his best friend Jerry Nolan had a record contract. In 1980, our first Australian tour, we played to stadiums full of people. Peter missed that tour. And here we were, going back to Japan and Australia in March 2001, kicking off at Tokyo Stadium, and Peter would miss that tour as well. Eric Singer rejoined Kiss in the Catman makeup. Amazingly, during this final tour, I witnessed at least one miracle. An amazing change in the behavior of Ace Frehley. Maybe it's because he had a new girlfriend who seemed wonderful. Maybe it's because he was finally growing up a bit. Whatever the reason, I'd never seen Ace more responsible. He showed up on time, played his instrument, and helped out. Perhaps it was because Peter was not there, and Eric Singer, the sweetest guy in the world, was. The company you keep matters. But through Japan and Australia, Ace was a joy to work with. With all this drama, with all the personal struggle and complicated feelings, the farewell tour ended up being the #1 tour in the world, based on calendar years. We started in March, but we were consistently selling out huge venues. It's comforting to know that you can end up on top, even after almost 3 decades. I feel a sense of accomplishment from our merchandising deals. I feel a sense of accomplishment seeing fans around the world putting on makeup that imitates what we invented almost 30 years ago. But in the end, the most satisfying part is still getting up on a stage and playing Kiss songs that fans have come to love, from Strutter to Deuce to Rock and Roll All Night. Soon, Kiss will hang up its boots and its studded codpieces. We'll take off our makeup, and when we walk off that stage for the final time, it will be bittersweet. To be honest, there are some things I won't miss. The reunion tour brought us back to square one, both in rediscovering the simple pleasure of playing in a band and also in putting up with the headaches of band members who didn't see us as a unit. I firmly believe that people have the right to behave as they wish. I have never thought I was anyone's guardian or protector, but for decades I saw substance abuse problems intensify every insecurity, spark unreasonable anger, and fog Ace's and Peter's ability to make intelligent decisions. As the farewell tour winds down, it's clear to me that Kiss will never realize its full potential, because while the band was originally conceived as a 4-wheel drive vehicle, we often had to drive on flat tires. On the other hand, we've also gone where no band has gone before. We've survived the punk movement, the new romantic movement, the thrash movement. We've survived every movement you can think of. We walked weird, we talked weird. We certainly looked weird. And what genre we came from is anybody's guess. We owe our allegiance to the spirit of early rock and roll. The point was uplift. We wanted to capture the spirit and energy of bands we had never seen on stage. We wanted to go where no band had gone before. We wanted our fans to be proud of us and leave our concerts with big grins on their faces. We wanted to stand guilty as charged by the poor deluded critics who thought they were insulting us by charging that we made complete spectacles out of ourselves. You're damn right we did. We wanted, finally and most important, to let our fans, the Kiss Army, know that they were the only reason we were doing this, that when they came to see us live and heard our call to arms, you wanted the best, you got the best, the hottest band in the world, Kiss. They would know in their hearts we wouldn't let them down. Kiss will continue, maybe not in the way you expect, but it will live on. There will be a Kiss cartoon. There will be Kiss theme parks. There are already, as you listen to this, Kiss caskets. They say you can't take it with you. I say you can. My mother taught me to dream big. Reach for the sky, she would say. And to her, I owe everything. And to America, sweet America. Thank you for making a poor little immigrant boy's dreams come true.
Copyright 2002 New Millennium Audio, a division of New Millennium Entertainment, Incorporated. Produced by Deborah Raffin and Michael Wiener.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.